Hi, Callan. We're back.
Hey, Simon. What's up?
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling good. It's a Wednesday morning, and I'm really excited for this episode.
Yeah, this is really interesting because we've now recorded 2 of these. One was just us. The last one was the first one with a guest. And this is our second time having a guest. And none of this is public yet. ALBC has not launched yet. And we are on a journey together to make sure that we can validate our core philosophy that creativity can be one of the most powerful accelerants for progress. And at a time where progress is needed arguably more than ever, we are setting out to try to arm people with the tools they need to make that progress and work around the systems that are already in place that say you need money, you need infrastructure, you need to have an office at WeWork or something like that, you know? So we're gonna have an incredible guest, but I'm gonna let you do that introduction. Callan, let's talk about what we learned from Empath Labs last time really quick. Is that all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, it was my first time meeting Empath Labs, who's a client of ALBC. And what they do is they create little patient dolls for kids, and especially specifically diabetics, which me learning that as a type 1 diabetic, it just made my heart swoon. So meeting the guys, learning their trials and tribulations, and like hearing that a little better helped them be a little better, and now hire one of their first team members, or no, they have 7 team members, but to hire on an additional team member for their clinical trials is just, it's so exciting. And I'm really happy that we had a conversation with them.
You know, a lot of people look at healthcare as this giant unattainable thing where there's no room for improvement. There's no way to get into the, realm of large pharmaceuticals or clinical trials. And these are just 2 guys who had a passion for making clinical trial experiences better for pediatric patients. And over the past 13 years have worked their way from experimenting with little dolls to having an actual solution being deployed globally in a global clinical trial. And they did that through little baby steps, constantly iterating, never giving up. And when they got stuck, they started with empathizing with their audience. Okay, so it's not about what they wanted to do. It's what their audience needed, what their patients needed, what the caregivers needed, truly understanding and saying, how can we make what we do better to be a programmatic experience rather than just a product we're trying to sell, right? And they just are such an incredible inspiration for us in terms of how you can lead with empathy, how you can innovate, and how you can make something as big as healthcare work better for people, even if just a little better. But today, what we're going to talk about is the big issue they brought up as well, which is as a small nonprofit startup, most people say, hey, you need to go raise money. And that was never really in the cards for them, right? So they made this journey for 13 years without ever seeking private investment, without bringing in venture capital, without going the traditional routes of a large-scale crowdfunding campaign, right? They were able to do this by testing, iterating, and working on products. So one of the biggest questions that we get is how to go about raising money, right? Everybody is wired to think in order to do X, Y, and Z, I need to raise money. I need to do what the traditional MBA structure tells me, whatever the case may be. And we have seen in those 5 stall points we talked about last time that creativity can help people get around that. They can help jump over those hurdles, virtually speaking, and they can help convince people way down the line. We've seen that creativity can overcome capital.
So today on the Doing a Little Better podcast, we're joined by a true leader whose founder story is the definition of creative resilience. Mother, artist, author, and founder of B Corp Grant Boulevard, Black Ivy Thrift, Noor, and a new friend of mine, Dr. Kimberly. We're so great to have you on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say today.
I'm so excited to be with you and to support you in this journey and to build with you as we just drop into what I hope will be a really tender conversation about the beauties and the barriers of building boldly.
I also want to acknowledge that Dr. Kimberly is way too famous and successful to be on this podcast, and we are so grateful and honored that she took the time. I don't know what you're doing here, but thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
The universe has aligned us, Simon.
It just happened, right? Sometimes these things happen, like meeting Callan, right? So Callan, why don't you dive in? We've got a bunch of questions for you. We'd love to hear about what you've been working on.
Dr. Kimberly, I'd love to hear what you're up to, what you're doing, what makes you passionate right now. Can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, what am I up to right now? I think right now I'm thinking about how to let things breathe. I think sometimes in the creative journey we're always in this space of ideation, execution, and what I'm learning now is in that rhythm. There's another little space that I think sits in the middle, which is just like a hibernation, where you have an idea that is full of potential, and you just have to learn to let it sit in soil and to give it water and give it light and plant the garden, even when other people can't see the flowers, just knowing that you're optimistic that something beautiful will bloom. So I'm in this liminal space. I'm in the liminal of, having some really transitioning from some things that were, close the brick and mortar, close another brick and mortar, and then really figuring out, okay, so how do we pivot? How do we lean into what it needs to be nimble as a creative, and really open to whatever new visions kind of emerge?
So Dr. Kimberly, you're talking about giving a moment to let the flowers that you planted bloom, so to speak, or, in other words, letting your legacy start to grow and start to evolve. And we live in this world that has zero patience. And one of the things that we've seen is folks, especially folks who are in the investment community or looking to support ventures like what we're trying to do, they want to see results now, right? I need you to prove your value in the next quarter or else we're done, kind of thing. And can you talk a little bit about how that's kind of the antithesis, not to put words in your mouth, but the antithesis of truly making change and progress over time?
Yeah, no, I do think that it's interesting, Simon. I do think that there is a real need to understand, what do the numbers say? Like the qualitative nature of building something is important to pay attention to. The felt experience I'm learning is what is essentially with the human component, right? Like the stories, the connections, the spark, the optimism, the enthusiasm that people have for your project. Those matter. How people are responding matters, but the quantitative is important too. And I think the liminal is an opportunity to really get clear on what are you trying to drive. And I think that the more you know what you're trying to drive and what you think the potential is, you can figure out how you want to be in right relationship with investors who are looking for early exits and aggressive returns. So I think that there's a need to be balancing both things at the same time. And I think that the more that we as creatives lean into being anchored in both of them, the better able we are to teach about what it is that we'd like to draw from and receive the benefits of the good that it's creating in the world through the connections that we're able to form, and just like the way that we are able to be in right relationship with how people are responding to it. So I don't think that we totally take that out, and I will say it's a great privilege once you move away from even being seduced by venture capital as the source of your lifeboat, because you realize that, one, you're not going to drown, and two, people who are threatening your life are not people who are safe to save you.
Well, I had a question to add on to that too, because, being Black women, I think one of the hardest things, especially when venture capital receiving less than 2%, it's hard to understand our impact and our magic and the quality of experiences that we bring to the table. So I'm wondering how you're able to articulate yourself and your mission alongside of your other peers and accomplices.
I think that one of the things I had to learn, and it was a really hard learning, and I didn't realize I learned it until 2 weeks ago. The first company I built, Grant BLVD, I think because it was in the fashion space, I really had this real sense of like, I would have arrived when Harper's Bazaar and when Vogue were recognizing what we were attempting to do in the fashion space. And it took me about 5 years to realize that they likely weren't going to recognize what we were doing because it was so countercultural to what they were. They were spending 99.9% of their time continuing to support, right? So if the person you're looking for validation is actually, to your word, Simon, is kind of their work is antithetical to what you're driving, it made me think differently about whose recognition mattered most to me. And once I surrendered that, ironically, literally that morning, I was talking to someone who I'm coaching, and I was advising him to just plant the garden. Like, don't worry so much about who's going to pick your flowers, who's going to visit the garden. Plant seeds that you believe are worthy of your light. And then that afternoon, Vogue reached out and was like, hey, we want to do a story on you. I'm like, are you serious right now?
Isn't that just how it works? That's why I had to ask you too how it felt having that Vogue interview. And it sounds like it felt like a full circle, and that's how divine works.
Yeah, it actually, I think this is the other thing that's a part of it on that side of the spirit, which is in capitalism. Capitalism is so, this is something I'm learning. Capitalism is so devoid of spirit that it means that we're always chasing something that's actually very dark. Right. When we move in ways that are devoid of our attachment to our souls, the souls of other people, by default, what we're doing is surrendering to another force, which seeks to dehumanize. Right. So put a pin in that. When Vogue finally, decided that they were going to, just amplify what I was working on, it was right at a point where I had surrendered that the project might have met its first natural life, like where I knew that there was a potential for a deeper hibernation and some small musing about what a new iteration might look like. But I hadn't completely fully formed it, and it got more solidified in that conversation. So it was interesting. It came at a time of not just necessarily mourning, but of surrender. And in the pause of the surrender, that the thing that I had built might have come to a first dissolution, a first stage of decay, that it might actually be moving into a space where this new seeds could actually blossom. And so I think that there's something to be said too, as creatives in this economy, we're so driven with like quick, we're always measuring time. We're running out of time. We don't have enough time. And I think we can save a lot of energy that can be reappropriated for creative thinking when we challenge ourselves to really revise our relationship with notions of time.
If I can comment on this, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but one of the things that we try to help folks understand is there's always a race to get to the next stage of their evolution. Like we've got, we know what our positioning is. Now we've got to get our brand launched. Now we've got our website out. Now we've got to generate XYZ in terms of, users, et cetera. And there's always a race. And there's this ticking clock that we see that starts from the moment that they start the business. And a lot of times what we find is if they just take time to sit in what they're trying to do and understand their audience and empathize with their audience, get to know their audience, things that they might have to iterate on 10, 20 times could actually become much easier and smoother by truly taking the time to understand where they're headed, why, what their North Star is, and the context of the environment they're in. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to, in your own observations, how do people break out of that cycle of feeling like, I need to make progress, I need 20 users by next month, I need 50 users, that kind of thing, versus, hey, if we let this sit and really let them tell us what we need, maybe this could be around 5 years from now.
I mean, that's a really hard thing. And I think the hardest thing about it is that, when you are creative and you really do have real capital constraints, you're trying to figure out how to pay your rent or your mortgage, you're trying to figure out how to live, then the need to be thinking about when there will be a return on your investment is valid. So I don't want to invalidate that's a necessary part of the idea of business. That's a necessary part of business. But what I will say, I've also learned that there's a real benefit to not cannibalizing yourself, where you're expecting your creative process, your business to feed you from the beginning. And that does mean it does come at a different cost. It comes at the cost of having to really quickly develop a deep discipline where you're able to work longer hours and maybe, tackle more than one project or more than one contract so that you can let that thing breathe. You can let it breathe. You can let it live. Because if you don't do that, then this is from Shakespeare, from Romeo and Juliet. You'll cherish it with so much love that essentially you'll kill it. Yeah. And so in order to not cherish it so much that you're just, you are putting so much pressure on the thing, because you're putting so much pressure on yourself, you can take that pressure off as creatives if we're able to diversify how we're feeding ourselves. And I do think that we also wouldn't ask, for me in my creative process, two things that are undeniable. I'm ambitious. If I want to apply my time and my attention to something, then I want to be recognized by Vogue for it. I mean, I'm not out here playing games. Okay. I've got serious thoughts. I have serious visions, like a lot of us as creatives. We believe in these things. I think there's something to be said at the same time for recognizing it's going to do what it does.
I want to add too, which is perfect. It's April is National Poetry Month, I just heard. And you said, and Simon, I think, quoted you, of course, you've spoken about business as a love story for people on the planet. What does that look like in action beyond the poetry?
I think it looks like first understanding what love is. And I think that for those of us who are really intent on building a purpose-driven, anchored thing, purpose is invariably tied to the spirit of love, which is care, which is tenderness, which is truth and transparency. That is what purpose is. That's what purpose is about. That's what building a purpose-driven thing is. But in order to do that, you have to have you have to understand love. You have to study love. You have to study what it means to love yourself, what it means to love other people, what the sacrifices that love requires. And I think for a lot of us, even when we're well-intentioned and we're coming at this from a place of benevolence, because we haven't done the deep dive of spending time with exploring how poets and how writers and how painters have told stories of love and through love and about love, we don't bring love. And that's one thing that makes us lose our enthusiasm for the hard thing. Love is about endurance. Love is about diligence. Love is about commitment. Love is about persistence and perseverance and forgiveness and grace. And if we build things thinking we're working in purpose and we're not working in love, then we burn out.
I wanted to go back to something you put a pin in earlier, which, you just reminded me of. We talk about, in capitalism, oftentimes that love can get trumped, pun intended, by, hey, look, I've got a chance to make a lot of money and, make myself elevated. And I've seen time and time again, as I'm sure we all have, folks who have that decision to make and say, okay, the fork in the road, right in front of me, I can go this way and make a lot of money, or I could go this way and maybe make a little less money, but help other people, or maybe go this way and use that money to then repurpose and help others. And one of the things we're trying to connect the dots here is there are so many folks out there who are now waking up to, we have to be making different decisions that aren't so self-serving, right? I think pluralism is a term that I've seen. But can you, please.
There's so many things in what you said that are, there's a profundity to what you said that I want to try to distill. And that is that what capitalism really calls us to love is our own egos. And that's a death trap. That's a journey to a lonely suicide.
Yeah.
Because it separates us from what it means to be in right relationship with our neighbors, both locally and globally. It separates us from our sense of the precarity of our lives and notions of legacy and leading a life of deep meaning. And it makes us obsessed. It possesses us with a spirit of greed. And so I think that we have to also recognize that one of the things that capitalism calls forward in us, what it calls us to, what it seeks to seduce us by, is a really dark, insatiable thirst for more. And that is not the formula for a really deeply satisfying life's journey. And I think that we talk about pluralism, which is like this notion of the common good, it is important. But in the psychology of humans, when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, the thing that has to be preserved first is the self. And that relationship with self has to be anchored in an authentic, deep, rich, full, unconditional love of self. And once that's been cultivated, once you've allowed yourself to roll around in the deliciousness of having forgiveness for yourself and letting the heavy things go and accepting things that have been hurtful to you, then you open up your capacity to build from a place that has the spaciousness to actually offer a deep and robust love to other people. And then you get to pluralism. So it still goes back to like the fork in the road is it seems on the surface, if it's like this binary of, am I going to struggle to survive and be generous, or am I going to only think about myself and be a billionaire? And I think that that's a problematic and an oversimplified notion of what the real choice is. The real choice, I think I'm learning, is will I look at my own life and examine it for where it's been beautiful and hard? Will I forgive those who have done things to me, or in their own sense of ignorance or their own sense of suffering, were not able to give me what I needed? Can I medicate that pain in myself? And then can I use what I learned there to help other people in addressing their suffering? And can I build something? Can I create something that stands in a really radical solidarity with the pain, with the loss, with the grief, with the shame, with the regret, with the observation of others' suffering? That right there, that's the choice. Am I building for in like real acknowledgement of my own full humanity, or if I actually allow myself to be reduced by myself?
I also want to acknowledge, like, I feel like I had the privilege of having such a binary black and white view, right? I'm a straight white male in America, right? And you two are both black women who have had a completely different life experience. And I also want to bring that to the surface. I can say, well, I'm going to build another business, and am I going to do it for profit, or am I going to do it to help, right? And what I'd love for you to do is elevate that part of the conversation, because of all the people who have not had the privilege of making that decision. What is the thing we're not seeing?
I think we're not seeing the opportunity that has to take place actually to do the inversion of what you suggested, which is for white men who, like you, identify as cisgender, to continue to stand in deeper and different language directed towards other white men and white women, for recognizing the work that has to be done within the psychology of the politics and the spirit of whiteness to move away from the spirit of whiteness. I've had the privilege, Simon, of being deeply loved by a number of white folk. One of my non-biological mothers is white. My therapist for 9 years was white. My best friend, who I call sister, is white. I mean, like, I have had my very best friend ever in life was white. And they were all people who, although in this construct of notions of race, were told that they were white and they identified in that way with being white, they didn't actually take any pride in the spirit of and the politics and the privilege of whiteness, which is different from being white. And what I love to see happen in the pursuit of a richer and healthier democracy, of a turn away from I as a survivor of sexual assault, there really isn't another way to say this, the rape of the planet, that happens when I think when white folk are able to teach each other and act with more courage for how they talk to their brothers, their sisters, their parents, their kids about what it means to be white and the harm that's been done through protecting notions of whiteness. So as a Black woman, I've been given a unique perch to see racism and misogyny. That's true. And in that way, because I haven't had the opportunity to perhaps pass for white, and to accept the privileges of whiteness, I've been able to observe them and the movement of that from a distance. But I think that the future of America, and really in truth, the future of the planet, lies in the capacity of white folk, whether they're queer or trans or cisgender, whether they're Christian or atheist or Jewish, to separate themselves from all that, from some of that privilege, from all of that, to dispossess themselves of the privilege. That requires a sacrifice. And that's what it means to be an accomplice, is to say, I recognize that in order for me to really actually show up, I'm gonna have to give up something. And in my own courage and my own radical love of myself and my love of other people, my love of myself that is in them, I will give it up. And that is what I think Black women have been doing all this time, and raising kids and teaching and being nurses and, and designing when no one was giving credit and cooking when no one was writing the review. We've been giving and sacrificing because out of a place of real love. And now it's time for that evolution and that revolution of values and of pursuing love to reach the shores of whiteness.
Ooh, pursuing love to reach the shores of whiteness? Well, that's right. I've always led with love, as you know me, and I wear pink because of it as a creative choice. I wear green because of it. I love Simon. I love your green shirt today because pink and green are healing colors. And I do feel that this has to come from a really radical way to heal. And if we don't heal within ourselves, the hierarchy of needs, how would we ever reach the top? How would we ever do it? And I think it calls a lot of courageousness to write back to emails and say things that are like really important and validating in a moment that feel hurtful and disrespectful. Because I think when it comes down to it, we have to have these conversations. And I'm so glad that other people are ready to listen. I feel like I've been talking to silent rooms and I've been this invisible leader. And carrying around being an invisible leader gives you that strength to be able to witness things and the power and the growth. My mentor says, thank goodness I don't look like what I've been through, because I know I look like I'm 20, but I've been through 1,000 years. So I think that it's really important that we all start to look at each other a little bit more clearly from a place of love, understanding, and like, I want to break bread with you. And I think that's where we'll start to continue on.
Yeah. And I think about going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for those of you who are listening, watching, who have studied that definition for what it means to pursue a full life. Actualization in that hierarchy is a place that very few people actually arrive at, because the challenges of finding security they're so harsh for so many of us that we don't actually even understand what it means to self-actualize. And I think, Simon, what you're talking about is, how do we use our businesses as an extension of our journeys of self-actualization? And that is a very courageous, mature pursuit.
Yeah, there's a lot of threads going on here. And there's an undertone, just in full transparency, of I'm still learning as well. And part of this is hopefully the vulnerability of saying, what can I do to be better and to do better? And one of the things that I've really been thinking about for ALBC as we think about launching out into the world is investing in organizations that will make that change that you're describing and figuring out what those organizations are. We've historically struggled to do a good job identifying what the best possible and most powerful investments would be, due to, I would quite frankly say, my own lived experience. And I'd love to hear from you, right? You have an incredible history of powerful brands that are unapologetically values first. Callan, I'm going to steal your terminology. What should we be looking for in this next generation of businesses? What type of businesses should we be creating? Should we be investing in? Should we be growing?
It's a beautiful question, and it's appropriate one for this space. I was sharing before we dropped in that I took the last couple of years to write my first book, Build It Boldly: How Daring Leaders Can Gain Influence and Create Impact. And one of the anchors in that book is figuring out how to give folks a more robust understanding of what it means to build a business that is values-led, values-centered, values-anchored, married to its values, versus like dating it because of something that happens in the news that you need to respond to. So you date a new issue. What does it mean to be, 10 toes down, 24/7? And I think that part of that is sitting at this intersection of what does it mean to be ethical, and how are they acknowledging the need for ethics? How does that manifest in their internal policies, practices, procedures? How does it roll out in terms of how they establish partnerships away from the company, all the way down, up and through their supply chain? Where is there an acknowledgement of people? And I think the more we as consumers are able to recognize the importance of these things, the easier it becomes to see who's really about that life. It's actually not that hard to know who's about that life, because those of us who are about that life, we're not hiding it. We're out of the closet in our kindness. We're out of the closet in our sense of like, we care. And so for those of us who've already decided we are going to step outside of, the toxicities of a profit first and only model, I think that that's the first place, is finding those companies that have stepped outside of that. And I think that, one of the things that's going to be tricky in this moment and moving forward is that, how do you differentiate, as the old folks say, the shit from the alfalfa? And I think that one of those things is we'll continue to see a lot of greenwashing. True. We'll see companies that say they care about the planet, but then exploit their labor. We should be mindful. We should look for impact reports, and in building the companies that I build, it's a lot of time to create an impact report, which means that you have to actually be thinking about how you want to create impact. You have to track how you want to create impact, and then you have to communicate that in a way that's digestible for consumers. So check for impact reports. Those can be measurable and impactful ways of just seeing, what a company is up to. I think when it comes to, the larger principles, how are we showing up for oppressed people? How are companies really actually acknowledging that some of us are actually being oppressed? What does it mean to be oppressed, right? Where it's like institutions, systems, governments are seeking to kill, steal, and destroy. So how are we paying attention to where that oppression, how are companies recognizing that? How are they choosing, where are they choosing to stand in solidarity? Are they standing in solidarity with the oppressor in a context? Is that who they give their money to the force that actually is the oppressor? And can we as the consumer not even realize who's being oppressed? So we as folks who are building businesses, we need to study oppression. If we want to build a more just world, if that's really the goal, if the goal is to build a more just and equitable, functional, orderly world, we need to study oppression so that we don't side with oppression. And I think that we also need to pay attention to the state of the planet and where it's in peril. And that means we need to study the state of the planet. So I think that the starting point when you're figuring out, and I talk about this in the book, and I'll talk about it in your direction specifically, is at ALBC is the work begins in studying the problem. The work doesn't begin in identifying the solution. Okay. So I think the first work is those of us who are building bold things, we have to figure out what will we study? To your point, what will we learn more about? If I'm going to say I really care about, the gun violence in Philly, well, I need to understand poverty in Philly. I need to understand the roots of gun violence. If I'm going to say I really care about, what it means to stand in solidarity with an oppressed people in the world. I mean, there's so many stories right now of that being the case. We need to do some deep research as leaders in the context. That way we don't step into accidentally the trafficking in the spirit of benevolence, which is like, I know better than you know. And because you are not as evolved as me, or not as traveled as me, or not as well read as me, I'm going to give you the solution. So we have to study. These are not, I think one of the challenges of this moment is that we want convenience. We want junk food type understandings. And, for those of us who are seeking to actually grow strong bodies, minds, we need organic produce. Okay. We're going to need to actually invest in higher quality nutrients. And that means we're going to have to read. We're going to have to become scholars. And that means we're going to have to not be lazy.
Love that analogy. If I may, I wanted to make a quick comment and a follow-up question. And again, Callan, I'm going to keep saying, just cut me off because I can't help myself. The quick comment is I just wanted to acknowledge the first step of everything that we work on is 100% discovery. And we've had this conversation with so many folks. They jump into we want to do a tactical solution without ever understanding the problem. And then that's where we go back to empathizing with the end audience. But the real question I want to ask is, you're an incredible communicator, obviously. And one of the things that I found is so much of our work as traditionally we call ourselves a creative accelerator, but branding, marketing, storytelling is translation. And one of the things I'm learning even now today in this moment is Callan and I have incredibly parallel life journeys with some really weird overlaps. And yet we still speak very different languages in very different ways. And so much of what we're trying to do is help folks who are over here figure out how to translate with folks who are over here. And I'm just wondering if you can comment on how you communicate with people with such a different lived experience, how you get people on the same level, and how you're able to move people from where they are to where you need them to be. You have 30 seconds to answer this.
I just want to say that is the question, Simon.
Yeah.
The how of that is the question, and that's the next TED Talk.
Yeah.
I really think that I'll give you this context. I was a classroom teacher. I mean, I'm still in a teaching practice. I'm in a school of design now, but I was a high school English teacher for a very long time, and most of my students, 90% of them, were white. And I was the only Black teacher many of them had ever had. And they didn't get to me until they were in 9th or 11th grade, which I think for a lot of people, a lot of white students, even that is rare. There are most white students in this country will never have a Black teacher. Right. So, and that means when they get into work and they have in the workforce and they have a Black supervisor, there's a reluctance because they don't have any training wheels around how to acquiesce to an authority that might be a Black person, might be a Black woman. Mm-hmm. I mean, shout out to the 2024 election. Put that in there. Okay, so we'll come back. So I think that one of the things that that has been helpful in that, I mean, people talk about this when you're talking about any kind of negotiation, you're trying to look for common ground, right? Things that you have in common with the person that you're talking to. That helps as an initial discharge of things. I would say oftentimes we don't recognize that we speak before we open our mouths through our body language. So I think being mindful of what our body is communicating. You know, are we stiff? Are we relaxed? Are we smiling? Does our smile show teeth? Do we take off our jacket? Do we take off our glasses? Those are ways that I know that I can change a conversation in doing that. Do I roll up my sleeves to suggest I'm ready to drop in? Right. So these are things that from a body language perspective can actually be very powerful in setting up conditions for equity. And I don't mean that. And I say body language because oftentimes one of the things that people will traffic in, which causes offense, is language, where it's like, instead of taking off their glasses to show that they want to really be present, or, you know, like rolling up their sleeves, or, you know, changing their positioning and softening it, they'll change their language to be like, what up, y'all? What it do? How y'all doing? And that is when they're taking the lazy way, because they really haven't recognized that what people check for most is what they feel. And what they feel is often registered first in the body. So, well, that's the hand-to-hand combat strategy. By the way of what it means to be in longer relationship, it's time, right? That and progress moves at the speed of trust. So that takes time. That takes an investment of time. And I think one of the things we're so conditioned to talk about, we're recognizing that time is money and not recognizing that it's well spent with people. We don't want to spend our time that way. So those are philosophical shifts, and moving into a spirit of being relaxed and being patient and being curious. Curiosity is the other thing that is so slept on. You know, like we don't come into conversations looking to learn, we look to transact. And so I think that moving into a position of like, what can I learn? Not even necessarily what I can teach. What can I learn about you? Who are you? You know, what happened? Tell me when. Well, where were you? So it's about the ways in which we're forming questions and how we're arriving and being fully present with people.
So I would love, because all of these have been gems, the love, the feeling, the teaching, every time with you, Dr. Kimberly, it's amazing. I would just want to make sure that we have one example when you used creativity instead of capital, when you were thinking about your business and you were like, I need to do something because I don't have the money for it. And I know a personal story of yours and being asked, do you need help? I feel like there's so many things here where I would just love to hear an example of how you use creativity to move yourself without capital.
I feel like it's like a lifestyle. So it's hard to distill one way that I've approached that. I think it's I'll tell you one of the most significant ways probably is thinking differently about my network. You know, like there's the ways in which people can give you working capital that's cash, but there's also the way that a friend who teaches yoga can come in and do it for you for a cohort that you're teaching of women who come home from prison for a rate that's below market rate because they want to stand in solidarity with the purpose that you're seeking to drive. There's a way where it's like, oh, I can't afford for a calligrapher to come in and paint that logo on the wall, but my friend Brooke is an art teacher. And I trust that she will do a decent job and she'll put love and attention into it because I've asked her to do it. So I think one of the things that creators have to be willing to engage in is what it means to be in community. And that means of being able to recognize in your networks, this person who is in your network. I write about this in the book. How do we evaluate our networks? And then how do we leverage the skills of our network to bring our visions to life, recognizing that now we're moving into bartering. This ulterior economy to a capitalist viewpoint, which is not where we're going to trade cash for a service, but a service for a service, a good for a good. So that is a creative way of running the numbers in general. That doesn't require that your bank account support the thing that you want to build.
And you're exactly the reason why I thought of you for this podcast, because I know you live in creative shifts. I know that's just what you do and that's how you move. So I appreciate your time here on this.
I felt compelled to just one very quick anecdote. You had mentioned curiosity being such a critical aspect. So from I can't name names, but major global corporation, we were trying to convince them curiosity should be the number one thing that they lean on in terms of being open to change. The executive team would not go for it. They felt like it was too, I'm not going to use words. They're very inappropriate, but it was mind blowing, right? This was a large, well-funded organization that you've heard of that was desperately looking to acknowledge to the world, we're trying to make things better. And curiosity starts with learning about what the world is. Like you've said, no executive would get on board with being open and vulnerable.
Yeah. And so goes the way, that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's what they, I will say that curiosity is a long-term commitment, and a lot of large corporations are not interested in long-term commitments that in any way run even parallel to profit.
Yeah.
So if you were to say love, if you were to say compassion, empathy, if you were to say, this is where this feels, it's a cultural temperature check, because the movement away from those ideals is the movement towards death. Because those words they push us towards evolution, and the opposite of progress is death. So it's just like a temperature check, right? Maybe not for all of us and the planet writ large, but for that company, right? For that company. So it's an interesting thing. And I think it's good that we talk about these things, that we recognize where there's a reluctance and a resistance to progress and to evolution. And so that we can see the liabilities of that. If we don't name the liabilities of that, then we don't actually know what we're gambling with. So I want to, just thank you all for having me on. And for those who are listening who love to keep connecting, they can follow me on Instagram at Kimberly McGlonn. They can buy the book, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Goodreads, Bookshop, Build It Boldly. And they can also continue to just follow the journey of Build It Boldly on Boldly on Instagram. So thank you guys.
I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly. It's truly an honor knowing you, and for you and Simon to both meet. You two are on the front lines, and I love learning from you every time. And I just want to say to everybody that's going to go buy the book for your employees, buy the book for your cohorts, buy the book in bulk and hand it out to people in the streets. It's something that you need to read. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Let's stay in touch. Bye, y'all.
Every time I talk with Dr. Kimberly, or I learn from Build It Boldly, or I'm just in her presence, I fill a notebook. So I'm so grateful for her time today. Thank you, Simon, for continuing the conversation, asking such great questions. And I want to hear, what we're going to talk about next time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to reiterate that was just extraordinary. And I feel like we could have been talking for 6 hours and it still wouldn't have been enough. So definitely follow her journey, get her book. I just feel like there's this next level of, powerful and impactful that we could all benefit from, and myself especially. But let's talk about what's coming up next.
Yeah. On the next episode. So, what was interesting is one of the things Dr. Kimberly talked about is the importance of impact measurement and the ability to prove the validity of what you're doing, or prove the efficacy of what you're doing. And while I didn't want to, derail the conversation when she was bringing it up, that's exactly what we're talking about next week. So yes, we acknowledge that there is an absolute cognitive dissonance between we need to take time to let things grow, organically build them, lead with love and with empathy. But on the other side, the very real world of we need to be able to measure things. We need to know if we're making progress. We need to know what the impact of our work is. Catherine from Impactable X will be joining us next week to talk about exactly that, right? How can you measure and test and prove the efficacy of your work, no matter what that work entails, or what tools you have in place to be able to do that measurement? So join us then. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.